Thank you. I'm hurriedly scribbling notes because I'm going to summarise some of the stuff we've just discussed. Because again, just like the previous discussion, literally within the space of 20 minutes, we've got 20 new concepts to think about when discussing supply chain security. Interesting that there's a move in terms of component verification and test up the supply chain, away from where one would have imagined that it should be taking place, out actually into the field, kind of that frightening place outside. Clearly an investment in inventory, which is sort of counterintuitive to what most businesses want to do in terms of cash flow and stuff like that. So appreciate the sort of efforts that are going in there. Gary, obviously control over manufacturing, or the word you used, which was at least an influence over manufacturing capability, so you know what's going on. For me, an overriding theme of what was discussed there was, strangely, in an information age where everyone seems to say it's what you know, it seems it might be who you know, and the relationships you have with your distribution and device manufacturers that might actually be a key to that supply chain security buffer. And I suppose we'll get to a point shortly where we can start to ask a few questions and delve into some specifics. Let's stop at that point. We'll just offer out to the visitors here, see if there's any immediate questions out amongst our visitors here. Anyone like to start with a question from the floor in terms of supply chain security? Anyone there at the moment? Okay, I'm going to start myself then, if that's all right. The simplest question I can ask, which is, in terms of risk in the marketplace at present, if I was an OEM or a CEM and I needed to keep my shop floor moving, looking throughout 2013, are there any trip hazards out there? Obviously, we can't predict natural disasters, but it was interesting. There was a comment in terms of the political issues that can influence a global marketplace, and we know right now there are big political changes and decisions being made in some key manufacturing areas of the world. What other things could we be looking at over the next 12 months in terms of preempting any supply chain problems?
I'll go ahead. I guess I'll go ahead and start. While we don't have we certainly don't have a global manufacturing footprint. I think you'll be able to speak a little bit better about that and how you can diversify risk through geographic locations of manufacturing. From what we see, or generally what we've been seeing historically, is in the last couple of years there have been some restrictions on where the countries where materials can be sourced. Materials such as tantalum used in capacitors has been qualified as I think it's called a blood mineral, where they can only be sourced from certain mines from certain countries that verify that the revenues from those materials or minerals do not go into the wrong hands to do evil things with. But those minerals are very in shortened capacity. There's very limited supplies of them, and when those supplies get interrupted, then there's a disruption to the supply of the component network. I'm using tantalum capacitors as an example, but there's been shortages in copper supplies and other things depending on the mineral resources.
Yeah, I guess from our point of view, the political scene is one that's important. Obviously, certain countries in the Far East are going through quite a rapid change. Employment law, employment capabilities in those countries is having effect on lead time, and the rising wage demands for workforces obviously has a big effect. So we mitigate that with discussions with our customers, looking at open order book, long-term forecasting, trying to get as close to them as we can in terms of their markets and their future demand, and we'll take on board buffer stocks into the UK, hold inventory here, and try and help the product flow in that direction.
I'll see if this, yeah, it's working, okay. Part of it is, I think it has to do with capacity. Right now there's a lot of excess inventory in the market, and we have a lot of inventory. I think everybody has a lot of inventory, and the lead times are short, but you know, I know in some component manufacturers, the fab utilizations right now are fairly low, and if supply and demand come into balance pretty quick, then and nobody's building a little or holding a little extra inventory, there could be you know, some issues as far as the lead times go.
Just out of interest, where's fab utilization at the moment, and where does it need to be? What's the window?
It's somewhere in the low 80s. It's predicted to be around 87%. For all the things that I've read, by the first half of 2013. The leading edge technology fab utilization is predicted to climb over 2013, or excuse me, over 90% in the first half of 2013. So those two indicators, I mean, when you hit into the high 80s and you get over the 90%, typically supply and demand is coming into balance. And there is it's kind of a watchful point for lead times to creep out at that point. So I mean, it's good for everyone. You know, there's more demand in the market, and we're selling more, but it's just something to be aware of.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, the political risk is always there. Whether it's you know, what's going to happen to the euro, is someone going to leave or stay, or who's going to decide that? I mean, really, our biggest role as a distributor, of course, and with any of this, you know, it could be a volcano, a tsunami. You know, there's a certain part of that market that still exists. How do we succeed in that market that does exist? I mean, and that's really what all of us have to do, what we have to face. You know, political unknowns are truly unknown. Natural disasters are certainly, you know, a 1 week lead time on a natural disaster, sometimes no lead time. So how do we be successful in an environment that whatever it is that we face?
I'm going to be a little bit greedy and just dive in with another question of my own before we put it back out to the shop floor. As an engineer, I was always taught that if I wanted to take control of a situation, what I needed was a process. And it was interesting that you were talking earlier on about the types of supply chain sort of processes and methodologies that are there. The problem was I very quickly found that as soon as we put a process in place, it stifled innovation. Because it tended to sort of restrict our opportunities. So how does a market put process control in place so that it knows it's got security in its supply chain capabilities while being free to innovate? Can it be done? Are the two incompatible? I don't know.
If I can answer that first, as the point of a component manufacturer, the best thing is to have close dialogue between the customer and the manufacturer. If we can have a good idea of what you think is going to happen in the future, then we can do our bit to help you react to that. Yeah. And it goes two ways. We know what's coming up in terms of the design and diversity of the new components in our field, and listen to us. Listen to us if at the point of manufacturer, we know a part is going to be in short supply, maybe because of raw material or piece parts involved in the manufacture of that part. And if we know of a change that can be implemented, it might be a slightly different footprint or a slightly different size, but we know long term that's going to be a much more secure component for you. Please take it on board with us and try and work with us.
I think another question I'd like to ask, following on from the sort of conflict raw materials that you're talking about, you know, we've seen I don't know if it's classed as legislation, but certainly guidelines moving to legislation in terms of conflict material sourcing. You know, that's going to have unintended consequences, I guess, in terms of pricing and availability. It used to be a few years ago that some disruptors in supply chain were a combination of either raw material restriction or potentially new technology There was a step change in device technology which disrupted the manufacturing process, and there'd be a bit of a wobble in the supply chain as that was filtered out. Are there any technologies on the horizon that are going to require manufacturing capacity that will need to be ramped, and new processes applied to distribution? I don't think there are, because I kind of try and keep an eye on things. Device technology seems to be quite stable at the moment. Is there anything I've missed?
I mean, certainly we're not we have one manufacturer on the panel, but certainly from our standpoint, that's where you talk about communication with the supplier. I mean, we have an entire team that's all they're doing is working with suppliers, as being one of the high service catalog distributor, whatever you want to call us. Our goal is the newest products, to have it available. And we're really, to a large extent, we're a marketing organization and an information organization that happens to sell some parts to pay for it. So we're just basically pushing information, whether it's if we know something's going obsolete, we let the customer know. If it's end of life, if it's not recommended for new design, manufacturer A is going to stop production here, so we need to tell you about manufacturer B that has, a very like or similar part, or manufacturer A is coming out with the newest, greatest version. So instead of designing this one in, wait a month, this new one's going to be here shortly. And that's really what we do. We have to push information to the engineers or make it really easy for him to find it as he's working on his new designs.
I agree with Pete. I mean, I'd love to see more transparency in the market. I mean, it's a communication age. There's a lot of information out there, and I'd like to think, other than natural disasters and things like that you can't plan for, that there is enough information out there that there's enough collaboration and cooperation that we can head down those lines. I mean, the way at our company, the way we approach things, there are some processes in place, and there's standard processes that go in line with the industry standards, but we approach it from a customization standpoint. So that comes with having that communication, talking to the customers, talking to the suppliers, and understand what fits your needs specifically, and it's not the same for everyone. So it's really hard to have a standard process that's going to fix everything.
I was just going to say, on the previous debate, someone mentioned the pesky salesman. I think actually the salesman's a key part of that dialogue. You can get a lot of information off the internet, you can search, but there's a knowledge gap that can't be filled just by looking on a data sheet. You need to have the intelligence from the market, from the manufacturer, on where they're going forward. And that, by definition, the internet has got to be historical information or current, not future.
I was going to say, go ahead. Yes, okay. Classic. It's quite clear that information is a theme that's emerging here. If you take a look at incandescent light bulb LED, had to be a pretty sizable disruptor to supply chain issues. New manufacturing technology, new distribution models, but most importantly of all, probably just a lack of knowledge. Are you guys kind of, and then you ask yourself, where is that knowledge going to come from? If we've got to educate a new generation of engineers to get new technology into the market so quickly that it's not a disruptor, I'm assuming the device manufacturers, in terms of the big scale guys, can't necessarily feed that out. So it's going to be one-to-one. It's going to be face-to-face. It's going to be the sales guys. And
talk to the universities. Talk to the students. Talk to the graduates for the next generation, so that when they come into the workforce, they've got the knowledge base to research and investigate new technologies.
Sorry, Mark.
I would say, coming back from our perspective in terms of the supply chain security issues of counterfeits, I would actually say the technology shifts into new devices is one combat mechanism against counterfeit devices from the manufacturers, is that the faster you stay ahead of the ability to somebody to reproduce your product, you're staying ahead of the the ability for somebody to counterfeit your device. From our perspective, that's actually a healthy thing, that it does keep the counterfeiters at bay. In terms of the communication flow and shifts in processes, I kind of step back a few questions ago, that I'd say now there actually are some standards coming out, finally, the AS5553, the 6081, the 6171, which is coming. Those are standards, there are processes, there are methodologies for detecting counterfeit components, but within those within those standards and within a good procedure, there has to be built in the flexibility to adapt to changes that happen in between procedures and changes. As soon as we find one way to detect a counterfeit device, the counterfeiters are already there trying to work their way around it. So while we have a group of standards that we have to work with, we can't stick to those standards alone, and we have to have internal procedures that include both investigation and analysis on our own, as well as communicating with our customers and their customers, in terms of getting the information we need to make correct analysis and getting the information feedback from the end user in terms of what we did. Was that an effective way to mitigate it? So I would say there actually are some technology shifts from manufacturing all the way up through the opposite side of that are both healthy for the industry overall, but also we need to be careful of.
Right. Okay. Right. We're getting close to the end of this session, so I will re-offer my invitation for questions from our visitors and delegates in the hall here. Is there anything anybody would like to ask our panel regarding supply chain security? I'm looking for hands, but I can't see any. So I guess we can wrap things up there, if that's okay with you guys. Yeah. So huge thank you to our panel here for the time they have spent and the information they've just provided to us. So, thank you.